Thank you, Dave. Welcome everyone to our CIP committee meeting. It's 4:05. 4:06. I'll call the meeting to order now. We have an agenda. I'd like to vary the agenda just a little bit and welcome Dorothy Hudson to our meeting. Dorothy is the chair of the Municipal Heritage Committee, and she's going to give us a better perspective on heritage buildings in the town, or how we should move regarding CIP regarding heritage buildings. So Dorothy, welcome to our committee. It's great to see you here. And like I said just a few minutes ago, it's like old home week for some of us who have sat on the Heritage Committee previously, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Irv. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you here on our committee and joining us. Approval of the agenda. Before we approve it, I'd like to add one thing to priority issues, and that would be the item of non-applicable and how we deal with non-applicable in our evaluations. So I'm going to add that, and then other than that, is there anything else to add to the agenda? Okay, so I'd ask for someone to move that we adopt the meeting as discussed. Karen, thank you. Seconder, Becky, thank you. All those in favor? Good, thank you. Adoption of the minutes for the community or CIP meeting of November the 4th, 2020. They're very lengthy. Did anyone see any issues with the minutes from last meeting? Okay, it was a very good meeting. We had a lot discussed, and I didn't see a problem with the minutes. So if someone could move to adopt the minutes. Chris, thank you. Seconder, Becky, thank you. All those in favor? Good, we'll move them. Okay, disclosure of monetary interest. Any disclosure of monetary interest today from the committee? No? Okay, thank you very much. And we'll move to project updates. So none were identified. Mary, anything to add to that? Nothing has come forward? Yes?
So actually the Lockmasters Tap House Program 1 application and 33 to 35 Market Street for Program 1 and Program 3 was approved Monday evening by Council, and draft agreements went out this afternoon.
Great. That's good to hear. Was there any issues regarding the siding on Market Street?
Council asked that hardy board be installed on all 4 facade faces. So the agreement will be worded as such, and hardy board would be installed throughout the building.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Priority issues. Okay, we've already discussed the first one with Dorothy coming on stream with us. Priority issues, let's go to the non-applicable discussion, and maybe Mary, I'll start with you to give us a little bit of background on this, and then we can get into the discussion for the
committee. So
thank you.
So basically we developed this new Program 1 evaluation matrix earlier this year. There is in the evaluation matrix the option to make certain subsections non-applicable to an application. So where we feel that no windows or doorways are proposed or accessibility features, you can choose for that section of the evaluation matrix to be taken out of the final evaluation. So at the last meeting, we've been testing this individual scoring happening before we meet collectively as a group. And there was a few or just one here and there non-applicable received. At that meeting, it was discussed to count non-applicable scoring from individuals as a 0. I have received a lot of feedback from committee members since that meeting, and many do feel that non-applicable scoring done by an individual shouldn't count as 0, because we're essentially assigning a score to that individual and weighing down the average score of the committee members. So mind you, at the last meeting, we were counting if we received 1 non-applicable score for a subsection, it was calculated in the average score as a 0. Now with 1 score, it didn't affect much, but with multiple questions I got from multiple committee members on this evening's application, I've realized that we may receive more than 1 or 2 non-applicable responses during the evaluation of this application. And I mean, it would be in my opinion as well, that a non-applicable scoring should maybe not count as a 0, because it's essentially weighing down the scores of others who didn't have an opportunity to score under that subsection. So just with the hesitation of the last meeting as to how to count non-applicable scoring, Irv had mentioned at the end that we do need to find a consistent way to apply this. So I'll need the committee's ultimate direction on how they would like to see this applied and in the future for evaluations. You're on mute, Irv, sorry.
Sorry. What exactly are you recommending at the moment?
I am recommending that individuals who give a non-applicable score not be counted as a zero when calculating the average of the committee's scoring on the basis that it would essentially weigh down the score of the application, and that specific committee member did not feel that that section applied to the application and therefore did not assign a score. So I don't think it's fair for the committee to essentially assign a score on that committee member's behalf.
So if we designate that it's not applicable, we will ignore it completely. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. So if collectively as a group, you decide that a subsection is not applicable, then that section is completely taken out and the weight of that section is not considered in the final scoring. But if, let's say, 2 out of 5 committee members deem a section non-applicable, I would suggest not to count the non-applicable scores received as a 0 when calculating the average and just leaving those scores out of the average score.
Okay, so we have to decide whether we have to have everyone agree that it's not applicable, or that we have half the committee that agree that it's not applicable before it's ignored, or there has to be a balance there somewhere.
I'm sorry?
So if we have 2 people who say it's non-applicable, but the rest of the committee say it is applicable and they're going to give it a score of 1 or 0, how do we balance ignoring it completely with including it?
So I imagine that would be a result of the committee's discussion. So as you know, that the committee can ultimately amend the scoring depending on the discussion on the topic, and they can choose to raise or lower the scoring. So the fact that I've received non-applicables, I will state at this evening's meeting. I have not calculated the non-applicable scorings as a 0 when calculating the average. Personally, just in comparison of last time, I found that it did work out a little bit better, and it gave a better representation of where everybody felt the scoring should lay.
Okay, let's open up the discussion. Who'd like to start this off? Becky.
Okay, I thought I would, and I think I agree with what Mary's proposing, but I was going to propose that, is there an option whereby, because I think that it is a bit objective for some of us, whether or not we think it's not applicable. And so if, for example, there's a total score out of 100, but I put 2 categories non-applicable. So now it's a total out of 80 for me. But maybe Karen thinks only one of the sections is not applicable. So it's a total out of 90 for her. So then once all of those are calculated, then let's say my score out of 90 is hypothetically 50 out of 90. So then we turn that into a percentage. So whatever that is, whoever's good at math quickly, but whatever that is, and then maybe Karen has 50 out of 80, but what we're actually dealing with is a percentage out of 100, so that we all have something equal and we get to decide what we think is non-applicable. Is that a possibility, or do we have to decide as a group which one is NA together?
Janet?
I'm just going to offer up, maybe do the majority rules. If there's, majority of the committee says NA, that is now, they're not used in the matrix. If I'm the lone one that thinks it's not applicable, it gets included in the calculation. That just seems like a little more of a transparent way.
I agree with that. I like that. My only question would be, what would we do then if you put it non-applicable and you didn't assign it a score? Can we just remove your scoring from that? Is that possible, Mary?
If I'm the lone wolf, I would say that's a 0. Obviously, for whatever reason, I'm thinking it's not applicable. Everyone else is saying it's applicable and, assigns a score to it. For whatever reason, I have chosen not to. To me, that's a 0.
But I don't see it as a 0 personally. Like a non-applicable means like, I might see something, for example, as being an accessibility-ish, like for, there might be something in accessibility. I might say, well, this is, one of us might think it's not applicable to this, but to me, it's not a 0. Like they're two very separate things. So like that really gives a negative disadvantage to somebody. For example, I will never put non-applicable then because I will always be worried that it could possibly turn into a 0, therefore misrepresenting what I wanted to say. Does that make sense?
Chris?
I agree 100% with Janet. I think if it's non-applicable to me, it essentially means it's a 0. A non-applicable is nicer than a 0, but it is a 0. So, and I'm just willing to go with whatever the consensus is on this because I think it kind of artificially inflates the score if we start mixing it around. So if there's a majority that says it's not applicable, take it off the scoring. If there's a minority that says it's not applicable, count those votes as a 0. And to me, that's the fairest way.
Okay, we can always bring it back for discussion at the committee level after the scores are put in and see how that affects it. Karen, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think I get what Becky's saying. To me, not applicable shouldn't be given a score, generally speaking, but I think that we could be going back and forth for a long time on that discussion. So I like Janet's suggestion that if it's the majority not applicable, then it gets wiped out. And if not, if the minority says not applicable, give it a 0.
Okay, Becky, can you live with that?
I think, to be honest with you, my only concern is I'm trying to support something that's really objective, and I think it's not ultimately as objective. I think it actually artificially deflates the scores as opposed to the reverse. So I do disagree with that, but definitely, obviously, if everyone else feels the same way, I will fully support it.
Okay, Janet?
Just to follow up to that, Becky, I was the lone in one of the previous applications, and Mary did take that into account, and it didn't waver, it didn't change the score. So one out of the whole committee probably isn't gonna fail them, if you will. So just to have comfort in that, one person probably is not gonna make that overall score change to a failure. That would be my take on it, and it certainly was in the instance we had on the last application, so.
Okay, I'm going to move that we accept that if there's a majority have accepted it as non-applicable, that's the way we're going to take it. We're going to take it right out of our evaluation. If it's a minority, one person or two people, then we're going to accept that as a 0 from those 2 people, and we'll move on. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, Mary, program 4. Would you like to start, please?
I would. Sorry, I was just getting Chris Samir set up to get in. So I'm going to give a little bit more of a detailed overview because, as you're aware, we have a new committee member this evening, and I'd like her to have an accurate idea of the history of this application, okay? So this is CIP application, CIP 1702, Program 4 for Hotel Rideau. Located at 20 Beckwith Street North. So this program offers a tax abatement to successful proponents equal to an approved proportion of the tax increment, provided a new assessment reveals an increase of at least $300,000. Program 4 provides a maximum funding amount which differs from residential to non-residential. So one, assessment increase for non-residential components are eligible for up to an 80% rebate of the tax increment, where the assessment increase for multi-residential components are eligible for up to 100% of the tax increment. So funding duration may also be determined one of two ways, through a funding period of up to 10 years, or through a ceiling value that is equivalent to the maximum rehabilitation costs. Funding would cease when the ceiling value is met. So council determined that the application was premature in 2017, as many planning approvals were still needed to begin the project. The site has received planning and building approval since and has been under development since April 2018. The application was reactivated by the applicant in October 2018 and was reviewed by the committee. The committee directed for more information for the improvements that were above and beyond the basics at that time. The proponent has submitted this information earlier in 2020 for the committee evaluation. So upon review by this committee, they decided to appoint a subcommittee to conduct a detailed review of the application and formulate recommendations back to the CIP committee for consideration. Staff advised that the program 4 notes that the applicant must receive in principle approval prior to commencing construction when applying for program 4 funding. So essentially there is that one liner in the program 4 saying that in principle approval must be granted to the applicant before the project starts. So we have looked for this in principle approval by council, and we don't see that one was ever documented. So this new piece of information was taken to senior management to ensure that the intent of the CIP would be maintained if in principle approval was sought at present date, given that the commencement of the project has already proceeded. So senior management advised that the application has been previously presented to council and understands that many council members are expecting the approval to come forward in the near future. On that basis, they had advised that in their opinion, the intent of the CIP would be met if we pursued in principle approval at this time. So after consulting senior management, staff brought the new information forward to the subcommittee for consideration. So this was actually presented in form of a staff recommendation to proceed with in principle approval at this time. So, staff feel in principle approval could be achieved through council resolution advising support of the project and funding agreement, provided that program 4 reassessment threshold is met post-development. The resolution would commit the town to look at the specifics of a program 4 funding agreement. The subcommittee agreed to seek in principle approval at this time. So further, the subcommittee review, after months and months of review, had identified the complexity and uncertainty in administering the program before the impact reassessment is received post-development. They have agreed that council's direction is required to determine an appropriate timing for an agreement, given that this is not specifically provided for in the CIP program. Neighboring municipalities have been consulted on their approaches for tax increment funding, and it is understood that other municipalities also choose to wait for reassessment to ensure accuracy. One of the cons of this approach is being that staff would be required to manually track the receipt of the reassessment property value. So from discussion with the subcommittee, staff understand there is some hesitation in granting tax increment grant funding without the reassessment, as the municipal investment is difficult to project without it. At this time, staff are requesting the committee create a motion with respect to in principle approval for the development. Staff recommend the committee advise council on broad terms of an approval, such as length of time they are in favor for, if they are supporting of phasing the agreement, and any items the committee wishes to leverage for program 4 funding. For example, it's been discussed. The portico has been discussed for many years. If the committee is comfortable in defining percentages for the funding agreement, they are welcome to do so. If the committee is uncomfortable, staff asks discussions reflect why they are uncomfortable defining percentages at this time. Following consideration of in principle approval, staff also requests the committee make a recommendation to council regarding whether or not to wait for the impact reassessment on the property before enacting a funding agreement.
Okay, we have a subcommittee that has discussed this in detail. What is the subcommittee recommending? Chris? I think you were both on there, or Becky,
And
were you on
Mary.
that one also?
Mary, do you want to jump in on that, or do you want more me or Councilor McGuire to answer that?
It's probably best that you guys speak to your full opinion. So I
Chris?
mean, I can tell you the broad general idea of the discussion, but as for the individuals, not everyone has the exact same opinion, so it's probably best that the individual subcommittee members speak to their reflection of the discussion.
Okay,
Chris, are you doing it, or do you want me to? Or
Um,
Becky? Who else is Becky is on there also?
Yeah, since I missed that last meeting, why don't
Okay.
you guys,
Becky, you got it, or you want me?
You can go first, Chris. I'll follow you.
All right, you, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm a little late. I was watching on the YouTube channel, and it's very good without participating. It's actually nice. I prefer that, so. I think we wanted to wait until we got the MPAC assessment. We have no idea what the classification of this is going to be. Is it new multi-residential? And I'll ask Andrew and, sorry, I forget the other fellow's name, but to make sure that they're going to get a new multi-residential tax rate, because it's substantially different. So we would like to wait for the MPAC assessment to see. We don't know what magnitude we're even talking about here.
okay.
Does that sum that up, Becky, or you can jump in?
Well, and yeah, like, I mean, to start things off, and then maybe Janet can speak to a little bit more about the MPAC. But we had, just to give Andrew and Ken a little update, we've had a subcommittee. We created a subcommittee to discuss this so that we could come back to this committee and make some recommendations and ultimately to council. And I think that first we talked extensively about the process. This is our first program for application. It's been very complicated for us. We've had to really educate ourselves on you know, a tax abatement program, something very new for us. I think all of us can speak for the fact that you know, that this is a really exciting opportunity for us, something that's going to be huge for the town of Smith Falls, for our downtown, for creating housing in our downtown, and essentially this program was created to support initiatives like this, taking this very derelict building that had, of course, a very low taxes to begin with, and then this significant investment that we're seeing that's going to really impact, obviously, your taxes. So, you know, I think that we were supportive of the program for application. We know that that's something that you've been discussing since the beginning. There's probably some lessons we've learned along the way on the process of how, you know, we would maybe do it in the future a little bit differently. But I think that in the end, it's something that we all were supportive of and made recommendations to staff, which is Mary, as to what some of those percentages would be and what some of that, how it would be laid out. But then also we were, you know, ultimately it will be a decision for council and for this committee. But yeah, so I think specifics as to the numbers, I think that's where we, you know, came together with that 80 and 100. Chris Samura has mentioned some questions that he has to do with whether it'll be new residential or not. And, you know, Janet, maybe I'll let you jump in here with some of those specifics. Yeah.
Go ahead, Janet.
Okay, so a couple of things. The new multi-res, as far as that's a ratio the same as our single family dwellings, that isn't for town to decide. That is an MPAC call. So I wouldn't be able to give you that. I even begin to hazard to whether they're going to consider this new construction or if it's just renovations. That is going to be MPAC that will make that call. Just the other thing is assessments are frozen for 2021. So any new construction will be based on the last cycle, which was based on 2016 when our costs for housing in town were quite low. So we've run into that with other new construction, that you're gonna see substantially lower costs coming in assessment than we may have anticipated. Unfortunately, it's almost irrelevant what the construction costs are. We're finding that with some of our industrial properties, that they may invest, extremes amount of money that is not necessarily what it's gonna equate to in assessment. So that's something else to keep in mind. So all the more reason, yes, I think we should wait till the new assessment comes in to make that call, because it could be much lower than what that chart that the previous planner had prepared. It could come in much lower than that. So for us to say, this is what the value of the grant's gonna be and use as the sample, I think wouldn't be correct in any way. So those are just some of my input from a finance department.
Thank you. I'll go to Chris McGuire first and then Chris Samir. Chris McGuire.
Thanks, Irv. Unless, Chris, did you have something to respond to Janet, or?
No, I was just gonna discuss the magnitude of the differences here, but it's completely, if you wanna go first, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, that's, I definitely am with you and Janet on just, we need to know the impact assessment before we can start signing agreements or making recommendations. But I think based on the discussion that we've had at this table and off, going around this since 2017, I don't think there's any doubt that this is going to be a 6 or even potentially 7-figure tax abatement, but we don't know. We just don't know. There's this huge unknown right now. And now if we look at the 2017 projection, and this, Ken and Andrew, this is a question I've got for you. That 2017 projection showed the existing taxes are around that 6,000, 7,000 mark, and it phased those up to about 20,000, and then it was stuck at 20,000 until year 10, and then the full amount came in. And I'm wondering if that's still if those kind of ballpark numbers are still palatable, or because I think sometimes it might be easier to set the taxes paid than the upper threshold on this, because we really don't know what we don't know what it's going to be, and we don't know what, and we know that you guys have dumped a ton of money into this place that deserves abatements. So are those 2017 projections still kind of fair for you guys, or are they even still, it's been a while since we talked about them, so.
Yeah, I'm kind of, are you talking about the in 2017 when they came back with the assessment value, or projected assessment that was delivered to Gary Smith? Is that what you're speaking of, Chris?
I'm talking about Nikki's report back in 2017 that had, okay. I believe she had 40% of it commercial, 60% residential was split. But the thing that I liked about it was it kind of phased in. It started what the taxes are now as a vacant building, and then it phased them up to about 20,000, and then that was the remainder of the tax bill was abated. I'll see if I can pull up the report to get better numbers.
Okay.
Chris, while you're looking for that, Chris Samir, did you have something to add right now?
Yeah, for sure. So it depends on if we go to multi-residential new or not. We're in magnitudes over 10 years of being $200,000-300,000 to $1 million+ in abatement. So I support it. These two gentlemen certainly have put a lot of blood, sweat, and money into this project. But we just as a group need to know what we're talking about. We're not even. And again, it's not based on what money's been put in. It's going to be based on what the income is. What is the income of the 25+ commercial space? And that's how impact. They don't care what the bricks and mortar are. It's only this property will be only based on income. So again, it could be several years before anybody knows what the real taxes are.
Thank you. Chris McGuire, how are you doing with that report? Still looking.
Scrolling on our wonderful town website.
Anyone else want to jump in at this point? Okay, we'll just wait. Hang in there.
So Chris, are you looking for the overall assessment? That's what Nikki's report was based on? Is that
Remember, there was that projection that kind of showed the potential increase in revenues, but also the potential abatements back from 2017. And
Yep.
It's
It's around 823,000 on that report. It was revised in October of last year, I think.
No,
So yeah, about 824,000. But again, that was a scenario that Nikki come up with. It doesn't say that's how this abatement is to be set up. This was a scenario she kind of prepared. Certainly council could say X amount of dollars. It doesn't have to be based on this kind of convoluted, kind of phased in approach. I think this was an option she presented. And that's what that option would account for. We would in turn get the additional assessment revenue, and then this would be a rebate to the applicants is how it would work, so.
And roughly the breakdown on that was about 80,000 abatement, 20,000 paid out of the tax bill.
It was over a course of 10 years is the plan she had set up, was 823,000.
Okay.
I don't have the accompanying sheet, I just have the summary that she had prepared.
Was that on her report? I'm looking at one of the reports she did. It was May 25th, 2017. Was that the report? You know, I'm looking at this. Do I dare do this? Is that
Yeah, I
report?
think that's it, Ken.
Is that it? Okay. Yeah, her breakdown was based on where the taxes now, what we pick up in taxes over a 10-year period, which would end up about 19,000 at the end of 10 years. And the total abatement on her chart here was 879, or her total abated amount over a 10-year period. So, and again, that was based on a 2017 kind of assessed value of kind of a 3.6 million, I think. And so something.
Okay. Becky, did you have something to add there?
I was just going to mention that we have. Okay, we had so many. I was actually like jogging my brain through our subcommittee meetings, which I'm sure Chris and Chris were in the same boat of remembering all what we discussed. But we were talking about whether or not we should, as a group, move forward on recommending to council to make a recommendation to support it on principle. And then we basically, work out the details later, which I mean, I don't think is a big stretch for this committee to say that we recommend to support it on principle and sort of recommend a few certain scenarios. And like Chris Samir says, there's a lot unknown here with MPAC, and there's a lot that, there's a lot of varied numbers that we're working with. So, but we did talk about different options where there's like a max funding that if it goes beyond this amount, this is the amount that we were going to support, things like that. And some of that is still going to be depending on other information. But my understanding is that we were looking at asking for council's direction, whether or not to wait for the MPAC assessment, but that we would support it on principle. But and maybe Mary can weigh in on that a little bit too, if there's anything else that I missed there.
Okay, I see kind of a couple of things here. One, do we wait for MPAC to make an evaluation or not? Two, do we look at Nikki's report from 2017 and base our evaluation on that or not? And then what do we present to council to make a decision on? So those, I don't know if I'm missing a third option there, but those are the two options that I seem to be picking up from the committee right now. Am I missing anything? I'll take that as a no. Okay.
Can I just ask a question? So just to understand, so you're saying that the last round of assessment was in 2016 and the next round will be, we don't know.
It was to have been in 2021. It's been frozen to the last cycle.
Okay.
So new construction coming in, if you're completed and you have occupancy and MPEC was out and assessed, they're gonna use the same rationale methodology that was from the last cycle. So it'll be based on 2016 when they did the last cycle.
Okay,
If you're, I assume you're gonna be done and completed and have occupancy in 20, if not 2021, correct?
yes,
So, yes,
for sure.
it'll be based on that 2016 cycle.
And as far as just for the committee's sake, the ratio of residential to commercial, we have 1,300 square feet of commercial space in the building. It's not like a 60/40 or anything. It's only on fronting Beckwith Street that we have commercial. And so it's what percentage would that be of the building? 1,300 over, is it 25,000 feet?
20,000 square feet, yeah.
20,000 square feet. Of the 28,000 square foot, the total 1,367, give or take a couple of feet, will be the commercial side.
95%, 5% likely, or a little
Yeah,
less.
something like that, yeah, yep.
Okay. Becky?
So and Janet and Mary might be able to speak to this a little bit better, but my understanding, and this is what I was getting at when I first spoke, was that the order that this should have gone in, and it's our first program for application, is that council should have, back in 2017, with Parkview Homes, been part of making a support, like they would have supported it on principle back then. And that's something that we didn't do. And so I think that's something that we're looking to say that we suggest council to do at this point. Am I correct about that, rest of the subcommittee?
Chris McGuire, did you have your hand up? Or Janet?
No, I was gonna say that's my understanding.
Okay. Chris McGuire?
Yeah, and I think I'm like, we've supported this in principle and everything but writing up to this point, right? Like we've had these ongoing dialogues, conversations. But my big question, just kind of outstanding on the principle of it, is the principle of having the taxes go from that $6,000-7,000 range to the $18,000-20,000 range reasonable to you guys? And then is that, can we kind of put that in and that's, I think, as broad as we can keep it right now, but it still gives some specifics of what kind of revenue is going to come in and what kind of abatement's going to happen. Because I'd have a hard time if we agree to it in principle and there's there's easily like over a 6-figure range on where this could come in. It just doesn't feel right. So if we could get that down, then I think we've got a pretty good kind of range of what we're going to be looking at when the impact assessment does come in. Andrew and Ken, is that 6, 7 to 18, 19 palatable?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I just was looking at this chart though, Chris, and I'm not sure how. I'm just looking at it as how Nikki split it up between commercial and residential, whether it reflected what actually happened or whether that was just what we're guessing at. So I just have to reread the report.
Yeah, and it's way out of whack. Like I think it was a 40% commercial, 60% residential split. And with all these unknowns with MPAC, I think no matter, even if we make that a 95% split, the unknown is what that assessed value is going to be. And that's such a big unknown for us right now. Yeah, that's where I'm kind of stuck on it.
Okay, let's take this one step at a time. Can we agree that we support this in principle, that there should be a tax abatement for this structure going forward? Okay. And do we want to put a motion to that effect, council, that we support this in principle to move it forward? Yes? Okay, on that point, I'll take that as a yes. So we'll put a motion forward, Mary, that we're going to support this in principle for a tax abatement. Ken, or sorry, Andrew?
So regarding the 18,000, I hadn't read through this report previously, but when I first, before I bought the building, I went to see, was it Carl and Nikki?
Dickie Dwyer.
Dickie Dwyer, yeah, and a few there, just to kind of get a sense for whether it would be supported. I mean, they couldn't officially do it, but they definitely told me this would definitely fit the parameters and a building that was dear to them. So I proceeded. Now, I actually didn't plan on 18,000. I knew at that time the taxes were 6,000 or 7,000. So I was actually thinking it would stay at the same number, where this is almost tripling the number for the taxes. So I'm not sure how that came about. Maybe it's just a kind of mistake that Nikki made.
No, I think it was based on, I really think it was based on, she took the commercial space as being a lot more because it's only supported by 80%, right?
Okay.
So I think that's how that was derived. I believe, I stand corrected, but I believe.
Yeah, so I didn't actually plan on 18,000 from the get-go. It was the number that I knew was actual was $6,700.
Okay, it sounds like there's some, we need to do a little research as a committee here to try and pull this together. So let's agree that we're going to put a motion forward to support this to council. And Mary, do you want to add something right now?
It's not so much that I need to add it. So I know that you guys would like to put a motion forward. So other than the mover and seconder that you would call for, Carl has asked that we define some broad parameters. So my understanding from the subcommittee is that nobody really objects to funding the property for a full 10 years. It's defining the percentages or the phasing for the next 10 years. That's the problem. So what he has suggested is that the committee, with their in principle approval, also accommodates suggestions with respect for potential length, whether or not the committee's in favor of phasing, and any items the committee wishes to leverage for Program 4 funding. So it would be a rather lengthy motion, but essentially that the committee agrees that the application is supported in principle on the basis of, however long of a time frame that may be supported, if the committee's comfortable doing that. If they would like to see the agreement phased over the course of a stipulated period of time so that the percentages would go down annually, or any items the committee wishes to leverage.
Okay, I'm going to ask the subcommittee if all those items were discussed and whether there was agreement on how we should go about doing that, whether the term of it and the amount was decided or that has not been decided. Okay, so I see heads shaking here. So I don't think we can answer all those questions. Chris Samir, did you have it?
I certainly wouldn't be comfortable with a motion right now. In principle, I agree with it. I think it's important that the owner maybe contact MPAC and petition to make sure it is new multi-residential that we're talking about and not trying to go off the existings. This is such a can of worms on the fact that it was some multi-residential before, but we're talking twice as much taxes here. And so I would not, it should be new multi-residential is what MPAC should be assessing so that our tax relief is based on that. So I would not be comfortable putting any numbers to anything right now.
Okay, are we comfortable saying that we want to wait till MPAC actually assesses this? And I'm looking to the subcommittee to answer that question. Chris McGuire, you're nodding, yes? Okay, Becky?
Yeah, I think I'm probably, I do agree. And I think where we got into a difficult position sometimes was that, this is a, this is a significant amount of money, and we know that that's like ultimately a council's decision. But and I know Mary did extensive research in other communities and what they do for percentages for a program for like a CIP program. And there was a lot of different scenarios, and several of them do wait for the MPAC assessment. Some of them lock into percentages and maximums. So, and I think we did talk about it extensively. I don't think we arrived at a decision where we all agreed on something. Understanding too that it's very much something that would be tied to council making that call. But so truthfully, I don't think we did get to an exact number, although I think when we looked at those old predictions, like the scenario that Janet mentioned for the 2017, that was something that, looked interesting, but just ultimately there's a lot of variables like what Chris is talking about with MPAC. And, but I think, whether or not we want to make a recommendation about maximums and percentages, it is something we could do.
Okay, Becky, do you think that we should wait for the impact assessment?
I personally don't. I would personally feel more comfortable making a commitment of if we wanted to make a recommendation for a maximum amount. I'm more comfortable with that because I do have concerns about putting this off too long, and then it will be a different council. So then you end up with kind of different intentions. And then ultimately there's, you know, this is a project that will be complete by then. What's the motivation for council to be tied to those numbers? So those are my concerns, and that's the spirit of Program 4. And if we want to see more of this type of investment in the water treatment plant and things like that, then we want to be good on our word.
Okay, Chris Samir, I'm going to go to you first and then Chris McGuire.
I don't necessarily think we have to wait for the assessment. I think we need to know a ruling on what it is. In late 2017, early 2018, when the new multi-residential tax rate was a province-wide mandate, this wasn't even dreamed of at this time. So all of a sudden so we have to know what the tax implications. I have no issue making a decision after we're aware if it's a new multi-residential or existing. There's twice as much taxes that we're talking about here. So I would like to somebody to petition MPAC to tell us what it's going to be classified as.
Okay, thanks. Chris McGuire?
Thanks, sir. I think two comments. One is that like this council and this CIP committee is only halfway through its term. So like I know we got a lot more business to get done. So talking like we're about to go into an election season and we need to get some kind of agreement signed so that it puts things in principle into the future is premature from my perspective. And if we still don't have an impact assessment in 2 years, then it's time for that conversation. But I'd be much more comfortable agreeing to a minimum amount of taxes paid than a maximum grant amount, because I think that keeps the town interest taken care of. If we could all agree on the 18,000 number, I'd be more than happy to agree to that in principle, because, and then it could be $1 million tax abatement, could be a $500,000 tax abatement, but we know that the town's bringing in a little bit more revenue and the developer's getting a significant break, you know, whether it's 50%, 80%, 90%. That's about as much in principle as I can handle right now with so many unknowns.
Okay, Mary?
Sorry, I just want to speak to it quickly because it sounds like the committee believes the staff are looking for like one recommendation here. But if it reduces confusion, you can give it in 2 separate motions, but there is 2 separate items at hand here. So one is the in principle approval. We don't have documented that council had given this project in principle approval in 2017 when Program 4 was applied for. And in order to be consistent with the way Program 4 is written, we do need to achieve in principle approval for this application. So I understand that there's hesitation with respect to defining broad parameters of it. And that's absolutely all right, as long as the minutes and the discussion reflect why there's hesitation. I don't see any issue with not saying, you know, they support it for up to 10 years or percentages or saying anything with phasing. I would suggest items such as what the committee would like to ensure is installed or put on the property. Again, just going back to the portico discussion that continuously comes up whenever we come up with the program. This wouldn't result in a funding agreement though. This will result in a council resolution. Again, rather lengthy one, but it would give just broad parameters of items that need to be met for the town to consider funding an agreement. And the second portion of this is that we need council's direction on whether or not we need to wait for the impact reassessment so we can better project the municipal investment for this.
Okay, we're going around in circles on this. I'm going to break it right here. I want to put forward a motion that we agree to abatement in principle, and that's all we agree on. And we're going to put that forward to council. Then I'd like the subcommittee to take this back because Chris McGuire said it, there's so many unknowns here. There's too many unknowns for us to make a decision. We're going around in circles. I can see Andrew that is concerned with what Nikki put forward. So I'd like it to go back to the subcommittee for discussion, look at Mary's question specifically, and see if we can come up with a decision from the subcommittee as to what their recommendation is for this committee to move forward with a motion to council, because we've got too many unanswered questions here, and we really can't go forward on this. Chris?
Yeah, so I would love to, the subcommittee can work on that, no problem at all, but I'd like to have a meeting with the committee before we go to draft up our resolution to make sure we all agree.
Okay, Mary, could you just put a motion together regarding us agreeing to support this in principle?
I'll go first that if you want. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, and the principle is the principle of abatement, and that's all we're going to suggest to council at this point.
I'll certainly bring that motion forward.
Okay, Chris Samira, will you second that? Yes. Are we in agreement? Karen? Yeah. Becky? Yes. Janet? Dorothy? Yes. So I think we're all in agreement. Janet?
Just asked a quick question. I do have to leave at 5. I apologize, but just curious if the applicants can indicate, are we close to getting occupancy? Do you know if the building's at that stage? Just trying to get a feel for when, because that information goes directly to MPAC, and that will then get the ball rolling. So that might give council some idea how close we are to that assessment. Not saying they're quick in action, but at least we know that the occupants are going to be granted in, say, January. Do you have a flavor for when construction will be completed? And
Yeah, so right now their kitchens and flooring is going down. I've asked them to try to get an occupancy like on the core building this month. They are struggling, so I don't know if they're going to make that. I mean, the elevator guys aren't finished. The elevator's on site. So my feeling is occupancy will be January. I was hoping to have people moving in January still, but still to be determined on that. But we will have occupancy by January, unless something happens with COVID that we get shut down. I mean, we're all kind of a bit vulnerable there, you know. But we've had a couple of close calls, but we've dodged them. So realizing that.
Well, just know that our building department does get that information quickly to MPAC, and that's their starting point to start working on the assessed values. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's call that discussion as complete.
Sorry, Irv, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I just want to clarify that even after discussion, that we're putting you put a motion forward that the committee simply supports this application in principle. Chris Samir seconded it, and there was talk about the subcommittee. Sorry, are you asking for the subcommittee?
I'm asking for the subcommittee to go back to discussions to answer the questions that you had put forward, if that's possible.
So the motion's going to the subcommittee before going to council for in-principle approval? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm saying the motion can go to council. I'm saying there were, as Chris McGuire suggested, there's a lot of questions still out there that are unanswered, and we can't make a decision until those questions are resolved. So the subcommittee needs to look at it again and then move it forward. Chris Samir first, and then Chris McGuire.
Chris McGuire is ahead of me. Go ahead, Chris.
And just, Irv, I don't want to give the impression that the subcommittee is going to meet next week or next month. Like we need information from council based on how this discussion goes, and then B, we need some MPAC information. So like we're talking like 6 months, you know what I mean? This isn't going to be a kind of January meeting discussion kind of thing with the report back.
And Mary, I brought the motion forward, and I don't know if Chris or Becky seconded it. So just so you're aware of how that went.
Sorry, you brought the motion forward?
Correct, yes.
Sorry, I had her say he was gonna put the motion forward. So
No, okay.
I will review the video to find out who seconded it.
I think it was Chris McGuire, but I could be wrong.
Sure.
So I do
Okay.
apologize, because I guess this is a little bit off track of, I guess, what I suspected. So in principal approval, the motion of the committee, because this application needs to seek and needs to have in principal approval by council according to the program forward. So will I be taking the recommendation of supporting in principal approval to forward to council? And then I would also like to see a recommendation from the committee about whether or not council should consider waiting for the impact reassessment, or if we're
Well,
just going,
I'm not sure that the subcommittee is in full agreement as to whether we should work or wait for the impact assessment or whether we should do something now. So I think they need to sit down and decide whether we should wait or not, and then bring it back to this committee. Chris?
We need a classification. That's the bottom line. I would not do anything without a classification. I have to know, are we talking at a 4% or a 1.6 or 1.8%? We don't have no idea. We're talking anywhere from 300,000 to 1.3 million right here on abatement. So we need to know the classification.
Mary?
so the problem is though, Irv, is that in 2017, council did ask for an impact narrative comprehensive appraisal. Ken so graciously provided me the information that Gary had obtained from MPAC in 2017 or 18. And I did cross-reference it with a chart that Janet had to say that we had been working off those numbers obtained from MPAC back in 2017. Now, in the information, it was specifically stated essentially that MPAC wasn't committing themselves to what they had provided in that comprehensive. And I'm not fully myself, I don't believe that MPAC is going to give us that classification that Chris Samir needs until the MPAC reassessment is completed.
Okay, so we've got Chris Samir saying that he wants to wait to see that. We've got Becky saying that that should be done immediately, and Chris McGuire, go ahead. And
Yeah,
then-
like I'm with Chris on this one, and that's so there's two of us on the 3-person committee that is saying that. So I don't know if we're gonna have another meeting. It's just gonna be the same conversation we've been having now 2 or 3 times. So I don't know if there's any advantage of having a subcommittee meet with this until there's new information available.
Okay, so what do you think we should do right now? Sorry.
Becky, do you want to jump in? You want to?
I was just gonna say, I do agree with Chris. Like, I think we probably are a little stalemated on that. Like, I probably like that model. There's different models of program fours. I like the model of like locking in percentages, maxing out, saying we're not gonna fund over, let's say 800,000. I'm just throwing a number at you. That's within my comfort zone, because my concern is that the more that the Parkview completes their project, the less motivation council or a future council, like, and I understand what you're saying, Chris, as well, about you guys all have really great intentions to support this, and I know that, but that's on principle. That's where I stand. But I understand that you, and I do agree that we're probably a little stalemated on that issue, but that's the model I like.
Karen Burns, you had your hand up.
My question got answered by Mary. I just was wondering what Chris was suggesting about getting the information from MPAC, how long that would take if we were going to get that. So
Okay,
Mary answered my question.
so I still don't quite see a moving of thoughts going forward here, that everybody agrees that we should get the information from MPAC first. And Becky thinks we should get this done quicker rather than later.
Sorry, Irv, I could be wrong, but I'm hearing from Becky that she's supporting in-principle approval now, and she doesn't want to wait for in-principle approval, but the full funding agreement should not be executed until the MPAC reassessment comes in. Is that correct, Becky?
Yes.
Okay, gentlemen, can you agree with that? Chris Samira?
Sorry, I was deep in another thought. Could you say that one more time? Sorry, I apologize.
I was saying that what I'm gathering from Becky is that the committee should support in-principle approval now, but full execution of a funding agreement should not occur until the impact reassessment is received.
I'm more interested in the classification than the actual impact assessment. I'm good both ways.
Okay, Karen, are you okay with that, the way it was stated? Dorothy, are you okay with the way it was stated? You're on mute.
With Becky's statement?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. That's the way we're gonna go then.
Is that the way you would like the motion framed, guys?
Yes, please. Becky, I'll assume that that's your motion going forward.
Well, can I clarify, just because if it's going to be tied to me, that, and I do agree with Chris that, you know, I would have personally I like the model where we would lock numbers in percentages and probably a max cap. But I don't think that's what we're proposing here. But I do agree with Chris that we're probably at a stalemate where I don't think either of them want to go down that path per se. So in some ways we don't agree, but I think that where we do, I think I'm sort of it, you know, so I don't know if it should come from me. I think it should come from Chris.
We can't change a motion though. We've already passed a motion, have we not?
Not this motion.
Wait, I thought the last motion, I thought this is what we already agreed on. Seems like we're kind of going back in a circle now.
So the only difference for this one is that we're talking about waiting for the impact reassessment. So I was just trying to provide level of clarity that Becky doesn't want the in-principle approval to wait until the impact reassessment comes in. And I mean, just clearly from reading the policy, waiting for in-principle approval would not be consistent with policy because this should have been done before the project commenced in 2017. So we're 3 years late to the punch on in-principle approval. But I'm also sensing from the subcommittee as well as others that the impact reassessment and for Chris Demir, the classification that comes with it is ultimately what will affect items such as percentages, length of time, etc.
Dorothy, you had your hand up.
Is this a second motion? We already had one motion voted on it. I'm wondering, is this a different motion we're on now?
I think it's come back to the discussion as to whether we wait for impact or whether we do something now, and that's the issue, I think.
So is it a separate motion?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thanks.
Karen?
So Mary, if we put the motion forward that we are recommending that we wait for the impact assessment, can council then decide that they don't want to wait and just move forward, or how does that work? I'm just looking for
Yes, so we would take your recommendation to council and council would make that ultimate decision because the policy doesn't state whether or not it doesn't state a timing for execution of the agreement. So we're going to ask for that decision from council.
Okay, yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay. Can we agree on the second motion? I'll put the motion forward that we approve it in principle because it wasn't approved 3 years ago, and that we're going to wait for the impact assessment to come forward so that we know exactly what we're dealing with because we do not know what we're dealing with right now. Okay, can I, Ken, did you want to say something?
Quick question. Yeah, I'm just looking at this, from Gary Smith back in August of 2017, when the council at the time decided to defer because they wanted to have some kind of an impact assessment. So, Chris, when you're talking about your classification, they got here to a property code of 341. Is that a classification or is that something different?
No, see, this didn't come out until this thing came out in late 2017, early 2018, where the province was trying to encourage builders to build apartment buildings, basically. So this new the difference is the commercial basically it's the commercial tax rate compared to the residential tax rate is what it is. Like it's multi-residential in Smith Falls is twice the base rate, base residential rate, which it's huge. We're talking huge. So it's, you've got to make sure not now, just now, but going forward that you guys are, because you have done so much work, there's no way it cannot be new multi-residential. But, so that's the thing we got to, if you look at the tax rates for the town, and I can even send you the link to it, because it's hard to find, but it's astronomical, the difference.
Okay, we have,
Sorry.
Lori, go ahead.
No, sorry, I'm interested in this discussion with Chris here because, I mean, if you have a building that we renovated, kept all the original walls in place, kept the original hallways in place, kept a lot in place, how do they define whether it's a new multi-resi or a converted, like, is that a gray area also? It is?
I'd have to say for sure, your property is probably the grayest area I've ever seen, where you spent so much money to clean it and tidy it up. And I don't care if you change the exterior walls, you've certainly spent money it probably would have been cheaper to build a brand new building.
You got that right. Yeah, you're right. Let me tell you, we've had that discussion internally a few times.
You might change that you haven't changed anything, that you've completely redid it, I guess is the correct terminology. Yeah. I'd be happy to talk with you offline on that too, guys.
Okay.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, so I put forward a motion. Mary, we had a motion going forward where we were just going to approve it in principle, and that's as far as we were going to go. Do we have to rescind that motion, or can we?
You don't have to rescind that motion. So that would be your motion to approve the application in principle, and this one can outline whether or not the committee wants to recommend whether or not to wait for the impact reassessment.
Okay, so I'm going to put forward that we should wait for the impact assessment to know exactly what we're dealing with. It's a complicated building, as Chris Amir just said. We don't know what they're going to decide. We have no idea. We don't even know whether they can break down the percentages between residential and commercial now, or they will say, no, we're going to wait till we do the assessment before we want to say what we're going to do. So let's put that other motion forward that we're going to wait for impact to come back with an assessment, and then we'll have the facts in front of us as to what we need to do. Can we get agreement on that? Okay. Chris McGuire, will you second that? Okay. I'm looking for a vote. Karen, yes? Chris, yes. Chris, yes. Dorothy, yes. Becky, can you kind of a yes, or do you want to stay out of that? Kind of a yes. Okay. I'm going to take that as a yes, and I vote yes also. Okay. Chris McGuire?
This committee does not support this in principle yet? Am I reading it right?
No, we agree with it in principle.
Yeah, we agree with principle.
Okay.
We just don't want to discuss numbers until we know what numbers we're talking about.
Okay.
Exactly.
I was just really hoping that you can say, yeah, we support this in principle for sure.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Yeah. I'm happy with that.
And that'll go to council, and then they have to vote on it. We're a recommending committee. They vote on the decision. Okay. Chris McGuire, you had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Unfortunately, I've got another appointment, so I've got to run. But I've sent my comments in on program 1 and program 4 stacking, so everybody has seen that. But anyway, best of luck with the rest of the conversation, and we will see you next time.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Mary, do you want to talk about the evaluation quotes that were sent in for the program 1 evaluation?
Yes, would you like me to give a little bit of an overview of this for Miss Dorothy, who's new to us? I can try to keep it really, really short.
I think looking at the time, we need to keep it really, really short, and then we'll talk.
Well, Dorothy knows a little bit about it for what it's worth. So, I mean, this application, it's a program 1 application. We received it in June 2020. Committee looks at it in July 2020. Even though the application was incomplete, as you may recall, we were looking for support in principle of the application because staff were unsure if the intent of program 1 was met because the iron railings being proposed for funding face the north and west, which are not street-facing facades. So at that time, the committee did choose to support this in principle. Now, as you may recall, there was a municipal heritage committee component that resulted in the MHC reviewing the exterior materials for the Hotel Rideau. And at the time, Parkview was proposing wood railings for the balcony facing facade. And I'm not sure if the accessible ramp, but it was the balcony facing facades that were proposed in wood. But the MHC preferred iron railings. They felt it was more heritage sympathetic. So there was talk at that consultation with MHC to use the CIP to help displace some of the costs that were associated with the higher quality material, which resulted with this CIP application. So the committee reviewed it in July 2020, gave staff direction that they felt it did meet the intent of Program 1, and they supported the application in principle, which essentially validated the additional work that Ken needed to do to get that quote. He was having difficulty obtaining additional quotations at the time because of the pandemic. So now the application is complete, and it's taken so long to come forward because the committee had decided that they wanted to review Program 4 and Program 1 together. Given that Program 4 is coming tonight, staff are bringing forward Program 1 as well. The quotations demonstrate an overall cost for the balconies on the second and third floor on the north facing facade, and for the accessible ramp at the rear that can be seen from William Street West. So the quotes demonstrate a cost of $24,100, which would make the application eligible for up to $10,000. I also shared a new concept sketch that was provided to us showing a courtyard space to the north and an accessible ramp leading to a commercial entrance on the north facing facade. The accessible ramp would be accessed off of Beckwith Street. That's it for me.
All right, thanks, Mary. When everybody put in their marks, what did we end up with there?
So I don't have a finalized score. I was kind of waiting for the non-applicable discussion. I wasn't sure where that was going to lie. But it does look to be just like looking at it. There isn't very many low scores. Most sections received a 3 out of 5, but that was with me calculating NAs as non-applicable. I understand now the conversation is where majority rules non-applicable, the subsection will be deemed non-applicable, but where there wasn't a majority ruling for non-applicable, then the non-applicable scores would be calculated as 0. So I would need to recalculate. Do you want to lead a discussion on the general
Acceptance?
General acceptance under the evaluation criteria, and I can conduct the recalculations based on the committee's discussion earlier?
Okay. Becky, do you want to start off this discussion, please?
So, I mean, this will be a good experiment because perhaps like Mary can give us what the original score was if non-applicable was non-applicable. And now if we see that non-applicable becomes zeros, some of our members may have been saying, oh, I just don't think this section is applicable. And now they're giving it a 0. So that's where my concern is. If it becomes sort of a score that I think Janet believes that it's not going to ever affect the score, and I don't believe that. So that's, I guess, my concern with just us being objective and fair. So I just wanted to state that.
Okay, thank you. Karen, how did you feel about it?
We could essentially approve this application or look at approving it, and then somehow stating that that could reduce the amount of the abatement by the amount that we approved for this, that kind of thing. I didn't mind that idea. I'm not sure how Chris feels about that, but.